answer is, of course, not a panicky. It still requires analytical sensitivity and judgment in its interpretation. Leximancer enables the analyst to make sense of large narrative data sets with minimal manual coding. But of course, you need a profound knowledge of the subject matter to do this interpretation. Okay, let's move on to our own study with Leximancer. So this is the paper that we just published, in, of course, also in this journal, Distance Education. It is, we choose to take the golden open access route because Distance Education is in that sense a closed journal. But within this journal, this paper is published open access, and we are also very proud that it was already translated into Chinese, and it's also published in Distance Education in China for those who prefer to read Chinese, of course. So that's the sample. As I said, we looked at all the full papers that were published in this journal since 1980. This journal is one of the two journals that are listed in the Social Science Citation Index. And the impact factor is quite high. It has an impact factor of above 2. It's published by Taylor and Francis, so Naidu is the executive editor. And over the 35 years, 515 full papers were published in this journal. This picture shows that Distance Education, this Distance Education journal, is one of the most central journals within the citation network in Distance Education. So you see here in the core, there is Distance Education, the American Journal of Distance Education, Open Learning, and also iRodel, for example. Those are the top journals that you probably all know. And this is how we collected the data. It's quite simple. We just copied and pasted the year of publication, the titles, and the abstracts. So our analysis is based on the titles and abstracts of these 515 papers. And this chart here shows the overall scope of the journal over the whole 35-year time period. You see the major themes here are education, research, students, learning, and interaction. Those are the 5 big thematic regions that are covered in the publications. So the journal publishes research on education, and the 2 major themes, students and learning, are connected via interaction. This is, of course, not a surprising result, but at least it shows the validity of Leximancer as a useful text mining tool. And to reveal trends in distance education research, we looked at the following 7 5-year time periods. The first time period, between 1980 and 84, I call professionalization and institutional consolidation. At this early stage of the development of research and scholarship in the field, much of the writing is grappling with conceptions of key and defining terms like distance education, of course. The first single-mode open and distance teaching universities were established in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And the concept institutions forms a thematic region of its own, linked with policy and with considerable overlap with the thematic region distance. There's a great deal of interest during this early period on understanding the nature, scope, and functions of these organizations on a macro level, and in ways in which their operations differed from conventional educational institutions. After a decade of distance education practice, the 1980s were a time of reflection on these newly founded institutions. Researchers during these early stages of the growth of research and scholarship in the field were most concerned with the challenges around the establishment of distance teaching universities, and identity formation of distance education as a unique and legitimate field of scholarship, as well as the emergence and recognition of distance educators as professionals. The period 1985 to 1989 began to see a few other challenges coming to the fore and occupying the interests of researchers. These included best practices for course design in distance education and the adoption and integration of educational technologies. Distance education demanded and needed innovative solutions to the challenges posed by the separation of the learners from their teachers and the learning and teaching organization. And consequently, instructional design, media, and educational technology emerge as new concepts in the concept map for this period. There is growing interest in the challenges of teaching and learning of specific content areas, courses and curricula. How to teach history, how to teach chemistry or foreign languages at a distance. (1990 to 1994). An attraction of the growing numbers of distance teaching institutions was their ability to offer educational opportunities to large numbers of students at economies of scale, with paper-based study materials to high numbers of students. But the growth of large-scale open and distance education institutions, the so-called mega universities, serving hundreds of thousands of students, brought with them high attrition rates and issues around the quality of educational provision. So you see a new bubble here with quality problems that emerged. Researchers around this time began to develop tools and strategies to understand why students were dropping out from distance education or withdrawing, as well as why they were continuing with their studies. And these considerations led to student support being acknowledged as the critical link in distance education. And this included use of newer and emerging technologies such as remote audio and video conferencing systems. These tools were becoming more widely used in the 1990s to offer and to support better two-way interaction among teachers and students. In the next time period, student attrition and quality assurance remains an important concern. The key for ensuring high-quality learning experiences in distance education was seen to be in the design of student-centered learning experiences and support systems with a focus on the needs and prior knowledge of the individual learner. The concepts of instructional design and development are linked with materials and student via support. Regions of learning. By now, the internet and the web had been around for a few years, and the latter part of the 1990s began to see some interest in the potentials of virtual learning. However, the majority of these reports at this early stage of web-based learning and teaching were just single case studies of projects and initiatives and pilot courses by early adopters reflecting a Lone Ranger approach, as Tony Bates coined this, rather than a strategic institution-wide approach or initiative. And this changed in the next time period, of course, that we call the emergence of the virtual university. The early years of the new millennium saw online learning moving into the mainstream of distance education provision, with growing interest in the virtual learning and notions of the virtual university. And around this time, there is a clear shift in the publications towards research on online learning. Concepts such as learning educational technology, online, course and delivery are appearing as connected in the concept map. 54 out of 75 articles published between 2000 and 2004 deal explicitly with the development and design of online learning. Researchers are fascinated by the enormous opportunities that the new information and communication technologies afford for collaborative online learning and teaching. The second half of the first decade in the new millennium begins to see a picture of distance education emerging that would transform its face and image as we had known it. Online education is beginning to be seen as the new face of distance education. And because online education is new and technology-driven, it is attractive and fashionable to all, and not just distance educators. Several studies around this time seek to understand how collaborative learning occurs and how meaning is articulated and negotiated in the light of constructivist instructional designs. Several case studies and studies of innovative instructional designs published around this time explore the full potential of digital media in collaborative online learning. And as computer-mediated communication is mainly text-based and the data is easily available, there are many studies investigating online interaction patterns. That's why we call this phase collaborative learning and online interaction patterns. You see here that discussion and interaction form a thematic region of its own in the concept map. Over the last 5 years or so, the theme interaction continues to be the critical mediator between students and learning, while the design of technology-enhanced collaborative learning experiences remains the major focus of the articles. But this period also marks the emergence of MOOCs. With growing interest in open educational resources, OERs, there is increasing fascination with MOOCs here. As you see there, this new bubble emerging linked with education. Two special issues of the journals pick up these themes for more in-depth exploration: OERs in social inclusion and MOOCs emerging research. And OERs are also a very big feature of the special themes issue of the journal on distance education for empowerment and development in Africa. So to conclude, we can describe 3 waves of alternating institutional and individual research perspectives that are observable from our study of 35 years of publications in the journal. So the first I would term consolidation of DE institutions and instructional design. The second wave was about quality assurance and student support. And the third one about the virtual university and online interaction and learning. Along those lines, the research perspectives, and that's quite interesting observation, alternate between institutional and individual or macro and micro level issues. That's why I speak about 3 waves of research. There is an innovation, a trigger, or a specific challenge on the macro level. The establishment of the open universities, quality problems, or the emergence of the virtual university. And institutions respond to that with actions, practices, and considerations on the micro level. Instructional design, student support, systems, opportunities for social learning and online interaction on the micro level. And this is, of course, mirrored by the research publications. And this, I think, also nicely shows that research emerges from practice, and the results should feed back and inform practice as a contribution to the professionalization of our field. Thank you very much, and now over to Son. Your 10 minutes of glory. The editor's perspective.
Thank you, Olaf. Thank you very much. I'll just take a few minutes to comment on what Olaf has presented from an editor's perspective, but also, more importantly, as editor of the journal that Olaf has investigated and looked into. There are several editors sitting in this room, so you will my thoughts, I hope, will resonate with what you're thinking. But thank you for the invitation to Oldenburg again. I was here in 2004. I remember very well. So it's a pleasure to be here again and talking in this context. Let's get on to the job then. Looking at the contents of a journal. With any kind of tool, and in particular a tool like Leximensa, doesn't tell the full story. Leximensa is a tool, as Olaf has very clearly explained, takes a body of text and gives you an indication of what is there by way of key concepts and related concepts and relationships. So that's an interesting line of research, and I'm delighted that Olaf has started this line of research into journals in our field, starting off with the journal. But there are some limitations or some constraints on the use of the tool to look at what the journal publishes, because Leximensa will tell you what is there. It will not tell you what goes on, how it got there. And this is why I'm here to talk about how the articles got there in the first place. So, nevertheless, like I say, and apart from those constraints of Leximensa, we are looking at one journal. It's one window in the English language. And as we all now know, there are lots of other journals in many parts of the world, including China, and Turkey, and South America, and India, and also producing a lot of research, not in the English language, that we need to investigate. So it is one window. We must be careful in interpreting this data and saying something about the nature of research in the field. Understandably, distance education is a journal that's been around the longest. Well, open learning was there before distance education, but it's an old journal. It's been around 38 years, 37 years. We're in the 38th year now. So it is a reflection of the way the field emerged and the field grew. So it's not an unimportant task. But does it tell the full story? And I think that's the point that I want to make. And many of us will agree that it doesn't tell the full story, because you have no indication. Leximensa will not tell you how the articles got there, how they were selected. And for that matter, like I say, it's an interesting line of research that I hope Olaf and his colleagues and his team would continue this kind of research and look into not just other journals in the field, including Open Learning, the American Journal, and Eurodol, and whatever DOL we have these days, but other bodies of knowledge. And in this, I would put things like PhD programs, academic programs around the world, which are in the business of educating and training people for the field, e-learning, online learning, distance education, and educational technology, because they are also an indication of who is getting out of the program and what kinds of knowledge bases do they have, what kinds of expertise do they have, and what kinds of skills they have, because they will have an indication of the nature of research in the field in the years to come. So I think looking at PhD programs and master's programs around the world is also an important source of information or reflecting on the field. And obviously, Leximensa is not going to be able to do that. You have to use other tools to do that. Also talking to program directors. Now, if I reflect on my PhD education many years ago at Concordia University in Montreal, I would argue that the people who were in the program at that time, people who conjured the notion of educational technology, had a lot to do with my training, which I bring to bear on the journal. So I think program directors are very important. So talking to people who are directing PhD programs and open distance learning educational technology programs around the world is also a very important source of information to reflect on the field. And of course, you know, hey, master's thesis and PhD dissertation. Now, Leximensa should be able to help there. And also things like, you know, distance education handbooks that Michael Moore and other people have put out, I think, and Olaf and Terry Anderson. What I'm fundamentally saying with that point is that, you know, looking at a variety of sources of information is very important in order to reflect on or say anything sensible about the field. And so that's a very strong point, and I think we've begun this line of work. This is an interesting line of work, and we want to take it further. But there are many other factors as well that will play into what you say about the field and the nature of research in the field. And I think, you know, many of you will argue and support me when I say that editors, editorial policies, and members of editorial boards, as well as reviewers, play a very important role in what gets into a journal and what doesn't get into a journal. And a lot of the times, although these decisions are very scientifically based, there is a subjective element to it, and I hope we'll have plenty of time during the 2 days to talk about that. Who are the editors? What are their biases? What are the perceptions? And what are the editorial policies as well? What is the scope of what you cover? Including members of the editorial boards, you know, they will have an influence on what gets published and what doesn't get published. And there are several of us here who are in similar roles, and I would love to have those conversations with people like Mark and several other people, and Uli, who are currently in those roles themselves. And my point is that the agency, I call the editorial agency, like Inga was saying, learner agency, there's something like editorial agency, the agency of the editor and the members of the editorial. What is the influence, or what are the influences of these people on what gets out and what doesn't get out? Hence the term, the gatekeepers. Are they the gatekeepers or gate stoppers? What are they? In the case of distance education, some of you will not know, that a very small number of people actually have had influence on what the journal has done. The journal was started way back in 1979. That's a long time ago. And Ian Mitchell and Desmond Keegan, people you know from reading the literature, started the journal. At a time when distance education was just about emerging as a field of practice, if you like, and an area of study. So in many ways, Ian Mitchell and Desmond Keegan were pioneers in starting a journal. Very few things like that existed before. Desmond Keegan, both of them were in Australia at that time, and members of ODLA, which is an organization that represents professionals in the field in that area as well as internationally. Desmond Keegan subsequently moved back to Ireland, where I think he had family and relations, and stayed on. And Ian Mitchell then was executive editor since 1990 and 1997. I'm just waiting for Lisa to flex something. I hope I'm not going over time. In about 1997, Ian Mitchell retired from active engagement with the field, and I moved to Australia about 1992 after finishing my PhD in Montreal, and assumed the deputy editorship of the journal in 1992. So I've been involved with the journal since 1992, and took on the reins from 1997. And since then, it's been about 20 years now, I've been editor of the journal. The point of relating who are these people who are managing the journal is to reflect on their backgrounds. Who are these people, what kind of training, what kind of education they've been through, and what are the impacts on what goes into the journal before someone like Olaf applies Leximensa to understanding what goes on. Because what gets published in the journal is influenced by the editors quite a bit, is the point that I'm trying to make. The other point that I want to bring to attention in relation to the results of Leximensa is what is the role of the journal? I mean, the point that I'm trying to make here is if you start a journal, if you build it, assuming that's what I meant by if you build the journal, if you start the journal, will the articles come? And my answer to that question is no, they don't. And if you just wait for the articles to come, your journal is not going to be as progressive you could make it if you went out and actually got the articles to get published. And in my life, I've been very proactive, and this is a conversation that I've been having with a lot of people, that in order to make a journal work and raise the quality of the journal, an editor needs to be more than a manager of the process. An editor's role is to bring to the game an agency in soliciting, in finding, in nurturing. So you're almost like working as a PhD supervisor. I mean, I would argue that of the many articles that I've been through, they've been like a 1% or 2% in which the number of articles in which I've had very little input. But 98 to 97% of the times, you're actually working on a promising product to take it up to a point where it's publishable. So I think, is the journal as good as the submissions it receives? And I think no. The answer to that question is no. If you just wait for the submissions to come in and you just work through the process and publish it, then you're going to have a very mediocre journal. I think it is very important to be very proactive in working with the submissions that you get and raise its standard to a point where it reflects favorably on the journal. Oftentimes also, what do you do? I mean, if say for example there's a situation where you really don't get enough articles, then what happens? You know, do you just publish the best from what you got in order to go to press, or you don't publish and wait for better articles to come in? How proactive does an editor needs to be? And my response to that question is that I think an editor needs to be very proactive and actually going out and looking for articles. So knowing where the people are, who are the people who are doing the research, networking with the community is a critical role of the editor. An editor is not simply a manager of the process, of the peer review process, is the point that I'm making. And in my case, in my 20 years, I did a lot of that. And I think what you see in the journal is an indication of the effort that I have put in, and I want to hear what other people think about that. So when Olaf applies, say, Leximensa to the analysis of the abstracts of the articles that got in there, one needs to understand how did the articles get there in the first place, and are they a true reflection of the total nature of the field, is an important point. The influence of the publisher is very important. Olaf did mention, by the way, that distance education is a closed journal. Well, I don't like the term closed. It's a subscription-based journal. Let's call it that way, right? It's not a closed journal. With due respect, Olaf, you know. But I think the influence of a commercial publisher or an open access publisher is very important, because when I took over the journal Distance Education in about 2000, it was being published by an in-house university press. which is basically taking the article, putting a cover around it, and sending it out. I think that, and I thought at that time, that was a boutique type of activity that could not be sustained. That journal publishing has got to do with a lot more in terms of marketing and promotion of the journal and dissemination to a much wider audience, which is why I took it to a commercial publisher, because I believe that it is too much for an academic editor to take on the responsibility of marketing and distributing and promoting the journal. That it would be much better for the health of the journal if I took on the advice of experts who are good at doing that and know how to do that, and let them do the job, even if we're for the sake of a bit of money. So when Taylor and Francis took over the journal, I think that they had an impact on the life of the journal and also the image of the journal internationally and nationally. So I think this reflecting on the role of the publisher, be it a commercial publisher or an open access publisher, is something that we need to think about and reflect on alongside an objective analysis of the contents of the journal, like the ones that Olaf has presented. Frequency of publication is also very important. How frequently your journal is being published. Distance education has suffered for a very long time, because for a very long time it only published two issues per year. And I've been told that, you know, if you really want to get out there and get as much information out, you need to publish more frequently, at least 3 or 4 times a year or more. Special issues are also very important, and one of the things that distance education has been doing is publishing almost regularly a special issue every year in order to capture issues and topics of relevance at the time. So themed issues or special issues are very important. But there is a subtle point here, some people might argue, that special issues often tend to be cited more often than general issues. And why? Because they deal with a specific topic and there's a cluster of articles on that topic in a themed issue. Now, some people would argue that if you overuse special issues, then you are unethically improving or raising the impact factor or the frequency with which your journal is being read. So you need to be very careful not to be seen as using special issues as a way of actually improving the visibility of your journal and therefore the impact factor of your journal. Distance Education has published several special issues way back since about early 2000, and I hope that we haven't overdone. The role of social media is very important, and fortunately we are living at a time where we have access to social media, and I think Distance Education as a journal has capitalized on that, largely with the help of with the publishers. Now this slide will show you very quickly, if you just look at one bit of it, it says that from just one article, you are looking at things like about 4,000 tweets from about 351 accounts and over 1 million followers. So I think social media has an impact on the impact factor of the journal and the visibility of the journal as well. So that is a consideration that we need to take into account in terms of how the field is reflected by the analysis of tools such as, or the application of tools such as LexiMensa. Of course, open access publishing is also a very important factor, because as Olaf mentioned, that the article that we published is the gold open access, which means we paid a bit of money or a certain amount of money to have it accessible openly. Now, that means that more and more people are going to read it, and it's easily available. So therefore, that also raises the visibility and the impact factor of the journal. So the role of open access publishing is also very important consideration on the development of the nature of the field. So what I hope I have done is to shed a bit of light on the objective analysis of the contents of one journal with the help of Leximensa, because I wanted to give the impression, we both wanted to give the impression that while Leximensa is a very objective tool, it will tell you what goes into the journal, there are many more factors that need to be considered in how the content got there in the first place and how people influence what got there in the first place. So I hope now we get a fuller picture of how distance education as one journal evolved and impacted the field, and subsequently how the field was also reflected in distance education. This is an interesting line of research, like I said earlier on, that I think can't stop here now, because this is a small window. This is one view of the world as it is of our field, and I think we need to take it to the other journals foremost and other sources of information about the field in order to develop a richer and more vibrant picture of our field. Now, I'll leave you with one slide. I'm the president of the Open and Distance Learning Association of Australia, which is having its conference in February in Melbourne, Australia. Are you going to come to me?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Yeah, this was just the first pilot study, right? This was just the first pilot study.
Yes.
Yeah. So we just played a bit around with Leximancer. Research is the most glorious form of play, and we just applied for a new project funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research, in which we will cover, I think, 26 journals that are listed in the Social Science Citation Index in the area of instructional design, distance education, and educational technology, of course, over 10 years. And that, in this study, we will cover over 15,000 papers that will draw a better picture of the field. Okay. In the program, you see there's a welcome address from Otto Peters. We asked him to give a welcome address. You probably all know his name. He is one of the pioneers in our field. He was the founding rector of the Fern University in Hagen, Germany's open university. And he's 92 years old now. He delivered a keynote in 2004 here. But now he said, no, I don't want to travel to Oldenburg anymore. But he agreed that we visited him in Hagen a couple of weeks ago, and we captured a video with him. And in this video, he sends us his welcome, and he also, and that's what I'm a bit proud of, he also commented on our study. Therefore, we decided to show this video now after our presentation. Now I hope it will work. We'll start soon, hopefully.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, participants of the 9th Eden Research Workshop. It is certainly a great honor and a privilege to have been asked to deliver a welcome address at the beginning of this interesting and significant meeting. I accepted this opportunity with great pleasure and bid you indeed a warm welcome here in Oldenburg. I was really impressed by Olaf's and Tom's paper, mapping research trends from 35 years of publication at distance education. It is true, my immediate reaction was one of surprise at the unusual theme and much more so at the, for me, still unorthodox method of acquiring new knowledge in our field. In my view, the paper seemed to be more or less a risky venture. Hence, I started reading it reluctantly. But by and by, I became surprised and even fascinated with the comprehensive and detailed overview over 35 years of research being presented. And finally, I asked myself whether it may even represent a new and very special scholarly achievement. This induced me to express my appreciation. Why did I arrive at this rather laudatory judgment? Let me answer by referring to a personal experience. It is necessary for understanding my response to this paper. Long ago, back in 1963, imagine 1963, I was asked by the then Minister of Education in Berlin to write an expert report about Fernunterricht, in English-speaking countries often called correspondence education or home study. At that time, I worked as a pedagogue at the Education Center Berlin and specialized in didactics, which means much more than just instructional design. Unfortunately, the minister's order sent me in a panic. Why? Because I realized soon that I was expected to solve an impossible task. Teaching at a distance was absolutely unknown to German schools and universities. And what is worse and more serious, I found that this particular method of learning and teaching was paradoxically also completely unknown to my academic discipline, which specialized just in methods of learning and teaching. I became aware of the unbelievable absence of any academic research dealing with this topic. There was not a single article devoted to it. Hence, handbooks on distance education did not exist. Educational compendia remained silent. Also, general encyclopedias did not deal with this strange subject. Such was the situation not only in Germany, but believe me, also everywhere in the world. At that time, distance education was considered a stepchild of education, not worthy of any unbiased, impartial scientific research. What could I do in order to become able to write my scientific expert paper? I decided to start a field research. This means that I communicated with ministries of education of many countries worldwide and asked for information about their activities in our field. This enabled me to take stock of distance education as it was practiced in many countries in the 60s. I analyzed their basic goals, described their systems, their structures, and their philosophies. And I discovered its special advantages in a time already slowly approaching the period of mass education. These explorations took me about 2 years. Then my expert paper was ready and could be delivered. However, meanwhile it had assumed the form of 3 books on teaching at a distance at schools and universities in 26 countries. Now, these books were published still in the 60s. They made educational experts and the public in Germany aware of the fact that systems of distance education had been practiced in many countries for a long time, especially in Canada, USA, Australia, but also legally recognized and organized on a ground scale in the then Soviet Union and East Germany. The first 3 books were, if you will, the beginnings of systematic academic distance education research in Germany. Perhaps it is important to mention that this research was established by a scholar not connected to distance education in any way, and therefore it did not smack the promotion rather than disinterested investigation. Now, when I started this research, I was convinced that I was the only scholar in the world dealing scientifically with distance education. However, years later, I learned that there had been also 3 more scholars who had started their research on distance education at exactly the same time. Börje Holmberg in Sweden, as well as Charles Wedemeyer and Michael Moore in USA. Having said this, you will understand the unusual way and intensity of my reaction. Having experienced the unbelievable absence of any academic research in the 50s and early 60s, I was just overwhelmed by the paper as I became keenly aware of the enormous progress which has been achieved since then in a relatively short time. It shows abundantly and very clearly what has become of those early scholarly beginnings. We recognize and experience that distance education research has developed internationally on a large scale. We are confronted with a large body of research endeavors and achievements, extensive, comprehensive, structured, multifaceted, alive, dynamic, and still growing. All credit goes to the 2 authors for revealing this really remarkable development and to arouse and attract our professional more detailed study of this paper impressed me in addition to this unusual impact because the two authors presented a new way of dealing with advances in distance education research. Their bird's eye view of such a long and comprehensive development of research is absolutely novel. They created a neat and tidy system of seeing together what had been so far extremely separated by persons, time, and geographical distance. In this way, they provided an example of a straightforward all-overview of distance education research achievements for a given length of time. They became able to reveal distinct trends and changes over time. They have made visible and apparent what so far was hidden from us. They succeeded in ordering a highly complex mixture of endeavors and data worldwide. They presented a major research themes, each of them very special and peculiar, and exposed their relatedness and interrelatedness. They deduced and presented a contribution to the history of distance education research by identifying clearly distinct historic periodicity. Now, being confronted with this unique development has been immensely satisfying. Of course, having experienced the now already long history of distance education research myself, I certainly am expected to be acquainted with much of what the paper has revealed. But this particular knowledge was pretty vague, often superficial, and partly even unconscious. And of course, it has been derived from my unique personal experience. This paper, however, presented it clearly, structured, extremely detailed, and without any personal predispositions. It is quite an achievement. Now, the main and highly interesting message of this paper is that all this has been achieved only by being a new research tool, the LexiMensa. This tool is able, as has been demonstrated by this paper, to analyze large quantities of text collections automatically with the help of statistic-based algorithms. It is an offspring of the digitalization of our field, of course. This indicates that the system works mainly with establishing quantity data. However, many researchers may still stick to qualitative research. We will have to learn more about the new possibilities of this new tool. It transgresses the possibilities of traditional research under certain aspects. We are astonished at what this data mining tool is able to achieve. Obviously, it is able to extract relevant information, to analyze and to display content and concepts, to tell us something about their relative frequency, centrality, as well as about how they are related and interrelated. It can establish thematic groups, ranked concept lists, and inform about the structure of the research under scrutiny. This means that it provides also a new way of looking at, analyze, describe, and to understand distance education. I hope you will take an active part in pleasant, insightful, productive, and fruitful discussions. If Lexi Mensa has been also new to you, let us hope that you will leave this workshop with a resolution to add this particular text mining tool to your personal stockpile of research methods. Good luck to every one of you, and thank you very much.
It's wonderful to have those few words from Otto this morning, talking about his experience as a pioneer, albeit an unwilling pioneer in distance education research. I hope that it has inspired you this morning. We've moved along this morning from Inga's discussion about self-determined learning, our role as academics, our voice, and how to reclaim our voice. And now we've looked at the history, we've looked at where we've come from, reaching from our roots, and the work that Olaf and Sam have done. And now what I would like is for us to open up the floor for some discussions, for some questions. I know people have been tweeting about these, and for those of you that don't know what the Eden hashtag is, it's EdenRW9. Please be sure to check it out, because there are quite a few tweets that have been happening in the background as people have been following this opening session. So we'd like to open up with some questions. I have pulled a couple of questions from the Twitter feed. So if you don't ask any questions, we will have some toasting despite that. So may we have some questions? Okay. Do we have another mic? Another mic, or is this the only one? All right.
Okay. So, my name is Blažen Kadirik. I'm coming from the University of Zagreb. I'm really happy to be here, and especially this introductory session, because it is really great to have a lot of new ideas. And I would like just to point out maybe something to connect all of these, starting from Inga and then to the very end. I think it is really very powerful message that we as academics should speak up and be open to the new ideas. But also, if we connect this to the to the journals, policy over journals, and so on, we also should be aware of variety of academics. So it's not just one academic voice, one academic perspective, but especially if we look at the major journals in area, and certain barriers for young researchers, how to step in, and also the barriers of English language or barriers geographically. So I would like also to ask some of the panelists to comment on this. How do you see how we can help those early researchers, but also those academics that are, you know, doing really good, very well shaped research, but they are not so, for example, fluent in English or coming from some geographical areas, and some editors or some reviewers are biased towards them, how to give them a voice as well. I don't know if I'm clear in my...
Okay, Anne, do you want to respond to that?
Yes?
Right, come down here. Sorry.
Can I just stay here?
Yeah, sure.
Otherwise it feels like a divide. So this is part of my answer. The diversity, I truly believe in the diversity. And also the options that diversity provide. Because even if we manage just to be a little voice in any debate, local, national or international, I think we put stepping stones towards each other, and also possibilities for early researchers to become published. I faced the same problem a couple of years ago. So what we did was I gave this course, which I did voluntarily without a budget. And then at the end of the course, I said, is there anybody out there who would like to write a paper with me? Just like a real paper. I mean, that's how I put it. And all of a sudden people say, oh yes, I want to. Not everybody was, only 2 were native English speakers, the others weren't. Some of them had quite senior research experience. Others were new to research just like me, but I mean academic writing. And so we made a group, a research group. We called it ourselves Mobimo Research Group. And we started to write papers and put them out there. And just by simply doing that, each one of us became much more certain of our capacities. And we saw that even though we weren't strong on many of the academic checklist capacities you need to have, we went out there and we did it. So just the simple act of doing made us stronger. So I totally believe that if you make connections with those willing, the stepping stones are already there to make a connection and to, make more things happen, I think. So, is that a little bit?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Simon, Olaf, would you like to respond to that?
I can make a comment, but I'd much rather hear from many other people in the audience. I'm sure people will have a view on that. I'll just say, I'm up for it now.
For instance, what I think was, and actually I took this idea from Tony Bates' recent open published work, and he actually introduced MOOCs with his with a headline taken from Bill Clinton to say, "Is economics stupid?" So actually popping up of the MOOCs has much to do with the economic crisis in the United States, where the student fees went up, and there was a major discontent about all this, which actually led to a surprised world when some people from Silicon Valley and some universities suddenly said, education becomes very expensive, but we can teach the world at no cost. And that is actually suddenly triggered lots of questions and things. So my interest is that distance educators, in a way, Inga suggested, she had statistics about salaries of teachers, precarization, and all this type of thing. And I think that's a good step to free education, the distance education discussion, out of the limitations and restriction of a sort of internal dialogue within distance education. We need a sort of to include more into this question of distance education. What happens externally and how distance education is influenced externally, and bring it into the distance education discussion. So that's basically that.
So, yes, I would certainly agree with that. I think that is a point that I was trying to make myself, that looking at the content of journals is a start, but there are many other sources of information that I think we need to look at.
A quick question for Olaf, and connecting partly to what Inga was saying. When I see that chart, a lot of what's happening there is, to use your categorization, micro to meso, and not so much as macro. There's a little bit of macro in terms of the institutionalization, but quality, it's a lot more of that is meso. And I say that because what Thomas just mentioned, you know, we do a lot of work, and currently, this is my own bias coming from the US and the research we see there, we do a lot of work around the micro and the meso levels of analysis, and a lot less on the macro. And I think that's partly what Inga was getting towards in sort of her contextualization of DE. So this was actually been really interesting to see what happened in one journal, and it'd be really great to see what happened with their further studies, to see if that continues to be that sort of within the meso to micro kind of conversation.
Come on down, son. So I think we have time for perhaps one more question. Or did you want to respond to it?
You're right, so I agree. It was wrong to talk about macro and micro, and in the chart I wrote institutional perspective and individual. You're right, it's about meso and micro perspectives that are alternating. And in the further study, it will be also interesting to see how different communities that are related to each other, or to see how they are related to each other. When we look not only at, this was just a pilot study looking at one journal, but when we look at, say, 8 distance education journals and another 12 journals in education technology and another 4 from instruction design, we will see how these topics are related to each other between those 3 big communities. It will be interesting to explore.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Anyone has a question? Just as a reminder, if you don't have a question, tomorrow we will be having focus group sessions with all of our keynote speakers, where you will be able to meet with them and talk to them personally about what they've presented in their keynotes, and have an opportunity to engage with them for further discussion, maybe talk to them about some of your ideas. And that will be tomorrow morning after the first plenary session. So I have some other announcements. Let me just go get my notes here. I also want to mention that Inga will be at the Oxford debate this afternoon, for all of you that will be there at 4:15, together with Thomas Husman, and they will be discussing the topic of personalized learning, the future of distance education. So I encourage you all, rather than running back to your hotels and getting dressed up for the conference dinner, that you come back here, and it is going to be really an animated and exciting debate, and I hope you'll have an opportunity to come. Finally, there will be an editors panel tomorrow afternoon. So those of you that are leaving early are really going to miss out, because there you're going to learn about how you can be gate crashers into the scholarly journal environment by meeting with the gatekeepers, who I hope will provide some insights on how to crash those gates. So, a few organizational comments. First of all, as I mentioned before, Twitter is EdenRW9, so be sure to tweet, provide us with some insights, some questions, what your thoughts are about the conference so far. There's live streaming for your colleagues that are not able to attend, so please be sure to let your colleagues know that they can watch the keynotes, that they can also watch the recordings. Your lunch tickets, lunch is important. You all have lunch tickets in your information packages. Now the Mensa is over here, so you'll need to walk across the street and go into that building, show them your lunch ticket. You have a set amount of of money. I think it's like $5.50 or something like that. No, there's not. Okay, never mind. Forget that. I don't know what I'm talking about. So just go over there. If you are uncertain about how to get there, I will be down in the lobby. If you have any questions at any time, be sure to let me know, or Olaf know, or someone from the Eden Secretariat, and we'll be happy to help. Conference dinner is tonight. For those of you who arrived on the train, it's at the train station. So you know how to get there. You'll be able to get to the conference dinner. And I would also like to take a moment, are the people for the best research paper here? We have 3 papers that have been nominated for the best research paper award. Could you please stand? Okay. One is the Emergent Evaluation, Initial Exploration of Formative Framework for Evaluating Distance Learning Modules from Palitha. Oh, I'm going to really butcher this last name. Edarasinga and Phil Wood from Leicester. Okay, great. And then we have the use of MOOCs in traditional classrooms, blended learning approach from Antonio Bralic and Blazeka Divjak from Croatia. Okay, terrific. And then the final one is contributions to teaching practice of an online community of practice of teachers and researchers, and I don't know any Spanish. Maria, Yo, it's in the program. So Maria Yo and Luis Macqua, and that's all I'm going to be able to do and that's you. So let's take a moment to give them a round of applause. Okay, and so that's all. We now have a break for a half an hour, and then we'll be moving to the separate sessions. So thank you very much.
Yes, no problem. Last activity.
Yes.